Hi there and welcome to this video tutorial on the new Content Aware Fill tool for After Effects CC 2019. Now, the new Content Aware Fill tool is a really handy, useful tool that's been brought into After Effects. It originated in Adobe Photoshop, and what it allowed you to do was select an area of an image and then fill that using the surrounding pixels to remove objects typically from a scene. Now, it's been super simple to do with still images for a long time, but the fact that we can now do it with video clips has the potential to be extremely powerful. So what I've been doing is a bit of testing with it, and I've used it on different types of footage. So we're going to have a look at some today and see how well it works, what its limitations are, and how I found the best way to use it. So we're going to start with this clip here. We have a mountain scene and we have a person in the sort of mid-ground walking away from the camera. So the shot is static itself, but we have obviously movement of the individual within the frame. So we're going to look to use the Content Aware Fill to remove this individual and fill it with the snow so it looks like a natural part of the landscape. Now, using the Content Aware Fill tool is actually surprisingly simple. What we need to make sure is that we have the panel open, and if it doesn't appear in the right hand side, you can go to Window and then down to Content Aware Fill and make sure that's ticked. Once you've done that, we want to take the playhead to the beginning of the clip, and then we're going to select the pen tool, okay, and we're going to mask around the object that we want to remove, in this case the individual here. Now, with the mask, we don't have to be particularly accurate. What we want to make sure we are doing is not cutting anything off, so we don't want to do something like that. We want to make sure we've got enough area around the object, and that's so After Effects can analyze the mask and pull some information from the sort of surrounding edges of it as well. So once we have it selected, you'll see that the default takes out the rest of the scene. So what we need to do is go down to the clip, twirl down, find the mask that we've just created and change from add to subtract. So that's going to take out this spot here. Now, because obviously that person moves within the frame, we want to track this mark. And because the movement is fairly linear in the fact that they're moving away from the frame, we don't really need to do too much detailed tracking. So I'm just going to take this back to none for a second. And if we then twirl down the mask, click on the stopwatch next to mask path, this means that we can start to keyframe the mask path. And if I move the playhead forward, and then we just move the mask slightly, and then we'll go forward a bit further, and we can just also just tighten the mask up a little bit because obviously the subject is moving further away from the camera. And then what we want to do is just check that the mask covers, and here we can just see it's just coming outside, so maybe we just want to expand the mask a little bit around here. Delete that keyframe and just get it pretty much lined up like that. So what is important to do now is to go back and change the mask to subtract, and we'll get this black hole here. If you've got a transparency grid on, you'll see this sort of checkerboard pattern. And then once that's done, is all we need to do is go across and generate fill layer. So we'll click on that, and what you'll see is After Effects will then start analysing the clip and generating the fill layer. Now, I've actually been doing this on a fairly old 2012 MacBook Pro, and it's a fairly processor intensive task, but it doesn't take forever. You can still work with your footage as it's analysing, and you can still do other tasks. I found that for sort of a 5 or 6 second clip, you're looking at 2 or 3 minutes worth of analysing and generating time, and that's on a very old machine. So on newer workstations, you're likely to see much better performance. So once After Effects has finished analysing and generating the fill layer, what you'll see is that individual has now disappeared. What's been created by After Effects is this fill layer, and if I go ahead and play through the clip, you'll see now that the individual has disappeared from the frame. If I move through, we can see where the individual was, and actually in this particular clip we can see the shadow here, which I haven't masked out on purpose, just so we can still see where the actual human being was in the frame. Now, the results looking at the screen are pretty good. There's a little bit of blurring, and because obviously I know that that individual was there, I can tell that it's been removed. But if you're viewing the scene for the first time and not knowing that there was anything there in the first place, your eye is not going to be drawn to that particular area of the frame necessarily. And so actually the tool has done a pretty convincing job. Now, that's one case, and what I wanted to do was actually have a look at a few others. So this is a slightly different example. Here we have a clip, and if I show you the original, we have got movement within the frame. So this is actually shot on a gimbal walking through sand dunes. So the camera is moving forward throughout the scene. We've got a little bit of shake and a little bit of wobble. And then we also have this flare that you'll see here, which is being created by the sun, is moving around. So we have a moving camera, we've got moving elements within the scene, a little bit more complicated, and also this flare is obviously being generated inside the lens and is actually not part of the scene. It's an aberration created by the camera. So I thought it'd be an interesting task to see if this content aware fill can remove this flare and do a convincing job. So once again, it was the same process of masking around the flare and tracking that mask as the flare moves, and then going ahead and generating a fill layer. And once that's done, we actually get, if I play through the scene, a fairly convincing cover-up. Once again, knowing that the flare was there in the first place, we can see a little bit of smudging and a little bit of non-uniformity, but not knowing that it was there, you're not necessarily going to be drawn to that spot within the frame, and so it's quite a convincing job. And so then what I've gone ahead and done is take the clip with the content aware fill applied to it. I've added a warp stabilizer to take some of that jittery motion out of it, and then I've also added a quick grade just to color grade it. And then if we watch through this clip, it's quite a convincing example there. We've got nice smooth motion, we haven't got any lens flare aberrations down here, and the content aware fill, I think in this example, is actually pretty convincing. So for this final example, I really wanted to put the content aware fill tool to the test. We have a aerial shot here from a drone where we have a human being here walking towards the waterfall, and then we have a couple of buildings in the background. So maybe with this shot, I was thinking if I could remove all elements of sort of civilization to make it look nice and wild. We've got no distracting elements, so we're going to take out 3 objects, all that are moving at slightly different rates because they're different distances from the camera, and actually you've got the human that's also moving themselves within the frame, so quite a challenge. So all it was a matter of creating 3 masks, 3 separate masks, and then tracking them with a few keyframes. Didn't really take very long because the movement of the human being is linear and these 2 objects don't actually move too much relative to the camera, but we track them. We do exactly the same, is that we select each mask and make sure it is on subtract, and we can see there by doing that it blacks out those 3 elements that we're trying to get rid of. We then hit generate fill layer, and the end result is that those 3 objects are removed from the frame, and if we play through, we actually have a pretty convincing result. Now, if you look very carefully at the foreground here, you can see we're getting some artifacting with this pile of rocks here as it stretches. So that isn't quite perfect. I think the removal of the 2 buildings is certainly very good. And for me, that's kind of the limitation of this tool. It tends to work very well on objects that are static within the frame. If you have a moving object within a moving frame, moving over different surfaces, it's obviously going to be a little bit more difficult to do. But depending on how big that object is, really determines how much you can get away with. So the thing with using this tool is that it does take a bit of trial and error. It's not going to work on everything, but certainly I found it to be extremely powerful and produce some pretty convincing results. I wouldn't be using it for everything, but cleaning up and just improving shots here and there, it can be a really worthwhile tool. So hopefully this video has been useful. If you've been using the Content Aware Fill tool, please let me know of your experiences in the comments below. If you've got any questions, drop them there below as well. I'll do my best to get back to you. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.